H.G. Wells was a British author who lived from 1866 to 1946. He wrote many books such as War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. The War of the Worlds particularly has been remade as movies several times throughout its conception. Most recently, there was a movie starring Tom Cruise as protagonist that featured the plot of War of the Worlds. Many of Wells's books feature extraordinary events and scientific implausibilities. That being said, though, one of Wells's books that I want to talk about today, and that I believe has been not paid the attention it truly deserves, is called The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. The plot of the book of The Island of Dr. Moreau follows Edward Prendick. Edward Prendick is your typical Victorian Englishman, and he finds himself in the beginning of the book on a boat with two other castaways, and the three of them have not found land for days, and they are on the verge of starvation, and they are drawing lots to see who will die first. And then in the beginning of this process, two of the other sailors fight each other and die, leaving Prendick, the sole survivor, on the boat by himself. He's found by a ship which takes him on board, and his life is saved by a guy named Montgomery. And Montgomery later saves his life again when he is cast off the boat by the captain of the ship. And Montgomery and his boss, Dr. Moreau, take him back to their island, where he meets all their inhabitants and their specimens. And all these specimens turn out to be beasts that the two of them have been operating on to try to attempt to turn into men. For Dr. Moreau wants to make a new species of man, one that is much superior to the man he considers worthy of contempt. Prendick, the protagonist, does not realize, though, that these are beasts that have been attempted to be made into men. He thinks it's the reverse, that men have been turned into animals, as these creatures can talk and communicate with him as if they were human beings. So Prendick goes crazy and attempts to escape from the island, and when he does not find any way to do that, he considers suicide. So finally he is dispelled of this notion by Montgomery and Moreau, and Moreau tells him the truth of the situation, and Prendick is horrified by this and taken aback. And later, Prendick starts to live on the island for weeks, and he starts to get used to it in a way, although he still wants to get away from the island and back to civilization and society. And one day, Moreau's creation, a certain Puma woman, escapes. Moreau chases after it, and then both of them die in the scuffle that happens between them. Then Montgomery goes crazy after Moreau's death, starts drinking, and gets into a fight with the Beast People, who he gives alcohol to, and then he dies in a fight with some Beast People that became hostile. Prendick is left alone on the island, and he lives there for a few weeks, and then finally he finds a means of escape, and he returns to civilization, but he's greatly changed in such a way that he can't abide living in society, because he feels that these humans, although they're civilized right now, could very well turn on him the next day and tear him to shreds, just like how the Beast People eventually regressed back to their animal urges. So, in the end, Prendick returns to the country and attempts to find solace through studying stars and astronomy. The Island of Dr. Moreau definitely features the fascination with the boundary between humans and animals. Many cultures have depicted monsters as having human traits, and this is carried over into the Island of Dr. Moreau with how Dr. Montgomery and Moreau make the creatures have human traits such as being able to speak and can walk, but at the same time, just like these cultures represented these creatures they came up with how horrifying they were, that's similarly conveyed through the book. And that's definitely one area that is very interesting. And in a way, it represents the human nature and how we are fascinated between the boundary between humans and animals. More interestingly, beyond the fascination with humans and the boundary between humans and animals, it also talks about how at times humans really are just animals that are restrained by society. For instance, we are shown this through how Prendick, upon returning to British society, is horrified by the fact that these supposedly civilized humans could, on the next day, become evil and savage. And in a way, we also see this on the island, too, where without the force and presence of Dr. Montgomery and Morrow, a lot of these beast humans begin to turn back into their bestial natures through, their natural urges returning. And in a way, this trait carries on further with how the boundary between humans and animals isn't so clear, as Montgomery, for instance, prefers the beast people over his time with humans. For example, once Moreau has died, Montgomery and Prendick are planning what to do, and Prendick wants to leave the island. But Montgomery, on the other hand, does not want to leave the beast people as he's grown very attached to them. And Prendick himself realizes this and finds him disquieting because he finds that Montgomery appears to prefer the beast people over normal humans. And in a way, this indicates how, without certain structures such as society or authority figures, people can resort to their bestial natures, and that can be a nature that is often savage and just as bad as any animal we prefer to look down upon. And in a way, it is a condemnation of how humans try to put themselves on a pedestal and look down on other species and each other. But most tellingly, the way we treat animals is very horrible. And of course, it's not exactly advocated in that way, but that's easily an interpretation you can pick up, is about how humans really aren't that special at the end of the day, and we're just animals. One feature of the book that I think has allowed it to be downplayed is that it's not as fantastical as some other Wells's books, such as space travel, time travel, that may contribute to how endearing the War of the Worlds has remained, in that we're still exploring space and we're fascinated by what could lie in space and the fact that there could be, or the possibility, more accurately, that there could be other creatures out there. And War of the Worlds definitely discusses this possibility by having these space creatures come down and annihilate humans. But I do think that Island Dr. Moreau is just as fascinating, if not more, than War of the Worlds, because it deals with a reality we have, that humans really are just animals that are not too much better than the animals we prefer to abuse and manipulate. And that's something more telling about human nature, in that the book makes you examine what it is to be a human and what is it to be an animal and what are the differences. And not to mention, it kind of brings in a discussion on religion too, as it touches upon something called the law, which is used by Moreau and Montgomery to keep the beast people in check, and it kind of dissects society in a sense, which is really fascinating. And that's why I really recommend this book. I think even if it's not as fantastical as some of other Wells's books, it's really eerie and unsettling in a good way that makes you want to read more. And it's just a really great adventure story that I would highly recommend, because even though it was written about 125 years ago, it's really relevant in a way that it makes us question the way we treat animals, because as we see, there has been lots of animal surgery and experimentation that continues till this day, and the book keeps that discussion alive and well. And even though Wells called it an exercise in ritual blasphemy and considered it to be a possibility, and that has been proven wrong, it still makes you wonder about how there have been cases of human genes inserted in animals. So in a way, the book is still just as relevant as it was back then. Thanks for listening, and I hope you can subscribe.